Welcome back, everyone. Tonight we're exploring 5 shadowy limousine conspiracy stories that will chill you to the core. These tales blend eerie rumor with high society secrets, painting a picture of hidden horrors on the open road. From silent, ghostly passengers to long-forgotten elite rituals, buckle up, because the next ride you take could be the stuff of nightmares. Before we dive in, I want to share a few important points. 1. These stories are presented as fictional narratives inspired by claims, rumors, and on-the-record articles about secret gatherings and high-profile events. They're not intended as definitive fact, but as entertainment exploring the overlap between rumor and reality. 2. You'll hear references to actual news outlets, local police logs, and public archives put in the description of this video. These references add a layer of plausibility, but the stories remain speculative. Real names, if mentioned, relate only to broadly known events or published reports. Everything else is crafted for the sake of an eerie, cinematic experience. 3. Where these stories brush up against real tragedies or controversies, please remember we aim to handle them with sensitivity. Our goal is not to exploit real harm, but to reflect on the unsettling possibilities that exist in the shadows of wealth and secrecy. 4. Viewer discretion advised. Some elements might be intense or disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. This content is for mature audiences who appreciate dark conspiracies and psychological horror. With that said, let's dim the lights, clear our minds, and embark on this dark ride into the unknown. Whether you believe these stories are pure imagination, or you suspect a grain of truth lurking behind every rumor, I invite you to experience the next chapters with an open mind, if you dare. Story 1. The Redwood Ritual. A chauffeur accepts a mysterious one-night job deep in the California redwoods. Among towering trees and secretive men, he witnesses a midnight ceremony that will haunt him forever. The chauffeur was hired for the job without many details, just an address in Northern California and instructions to arrive by dusk. The chauffeur's limousine glided off the main highway onto a narrow winding road, flanked by ancient redwoods. The deeper the chauffeur drove, the quieter the radio became, as if the forest itself swallowed sound. Finally, the chauffeur reached an unmarked gate where stone-faced guards checked the chauffeur's credentials and waved the chauffeur through. Beyond lay a hidden retreat known only to the elite, Bohemian Grove, a place rumored to host secret gatherings of the rich and powerful. The chauffeur's passenger for the evening was a silver-haired gentleman in an impeccable black suit. He slid into the back seat with a leather briefcase and a faraway look. The chauffeur recognized him instantly, a former cabinet secretary, now CEO of a major bank. The kind of man whose face you'd see in the financial news, not in the back of a hired car on a lonely road. He offered a curt nod in the rearview mirror. There was a tension about him. He sighed, almost whispering, "The chauffeur hasn't been here in years." As twilight settled, the chauffeur navigated the labyrinth of dirt lanes further into the grove. They passed clusters of rustic cabins and tents dotting the property. Here and there, the chauffeur glimpsed other chauffeurs unloading men in expensive suits and casual outdoor attire, an odd mix of summer camp and high society gala. The chauffeur's passengers stared out at the towering redwoods. "They say some former presidents are probably here tonight," the chauffeur heard him mutter, half to himself. The chauffeur recalled reading that even US presidents and top officials have been members of this exclusive retreat. The thought sent a chill through the chauffeur. So much power concentrated in one hidden place. At a clearing near a lake, The chauffeur was instructed to park alongside a row of black limousines. "Wait here until the event is over," the chauffeur's passenger said. He hesitated, then added quietly, "If I'm not back by midnight, just leave." Before the chauffeur could ask anything, he disappeared into the woods toward a glow of firelight in the distance. The chauffeur stepped out of the limo to stretch the chauffeur's legs in the cooling night air. The redwoods stood like silent sentinels. From far off among the trees came the murmur of many voices and the faint sound of music or chanting. The chauffeur couldn't be sure. Curiosity gnawed at the chauffeur. The chauffeur crept quietly down a footpath, lit intermittently by torches. The closer the chauffeur got, the more distinct the scene became. The chauffeur kept to the shadows behind a massive tree trunk and peered at a surreal tableau unfolding in a natural outdoor amphitheater. Dozens of men stood around a bonfire near the edge of a dark lake. Many wore red hooded robes that caught the firelight, while others were dressed in forest green cloaks. They formed a procession behind what looked like pallbearers carrying an object. The chauffeur's pulse quickened as the chauffeur realized it was a coffin, a long, ornate box hoisted on their shoulders. A low, somber dirge played from hidden speakers, and the men in robes intoned a chant. The chauffeur watched in disbelief as the group paraded the coffin to the base of a giant stone owl statue that loomed at least 40 feet tall, its blank eyes watching over the strange ritual. The chauffeur's mouth went dry. Were they about to perform some kind of burial? The entire scene felt otherworldly and unsettling. One robed figure announced in a booming voice, "Now they consign the cares of the world to the flames." The pallbearers tilted the coffin, opening it to reveal what looked like a human body inside. Even from the chauffeur's hidden vantage, the chauffeur saw the limp form dressed in dark cloth. A collective sigh or moan went through the crowd. In that moment, the chauffeur was convinced the chauffeur was witnessing something sinister, some sacrificial rite. The men lifted the figure out of the coffin. As the firelight danced, the chauffeur caught a clearer glimpse. The body appeared stiff, unreal. An effigy, perhaps. It was made of black fabric wrapped around what looked like a wooden form, like a mannequin meant to resemble a person. The chauffeur's racing thoughts calmed a fraction when the chauffeur realized it wasn't an actual corpse, but a symbolic one. Still, the sight of the robed assembly, raising this fake body toward the giant owl, was eerie beyond belief. They placed the effigy, what they called the body of care, onto the pyre. With a chorus of chants, someone lit it ablaze. Flames roared upward, consuming the figure in an instant. Story 2. The last masquerade in 1972. An undercover journalist slips into an opulent masquerade ball at a French chateau, hoping to witness high society excess. Amid surreal costumes and decadent glamour, he discovers a darker secret hidden behind the masks. The journalist still remembers the golden invitation that sparked the journalist's investigation. It was embossed with ornate swirls, instructing the invitee to appear at Château de Ferrières on the night of December 12, 1972, for a surrealist ball. The invitation was written in reverse script. One had to hold it up to a mirror to read it. That quirk alone told the journalist this would be no ordinary party. As a young journalist hungry for a big story, the journalist managed to obtain a staff pass for the event by posing as a waiter from the catering company. Nothing could have prepared the journalist for the sight that greeted the journalist as their service van drove up the long wooded driveway that winter evening. The first glimpse of the chateau was breathtaking and bizarre. The entire facade was brilliantly illuminated to appear as if it were on fire. Flames seemed to dance on the stone walls, a masterful lighting trick, casting flickering shadows across the manicured grounds. They stepped out into a scene straight from a fever dream. At the foot of the grand stairs, servants dressed in full cat costumes lounged lazily, pretending to sleep on the marble steps. It was disconcerting to pass these human cats, who barely acknowledged us as they carried silver trays and champagne flutes inside. Inside the mansion, it was as if we'd fallen through the looking glass. The entry hall had been transformed into a labyrinth of silk ribbons and giant cobwebs. Guests in elaborate fancy dress and surreal masks meandered through, laughing and sipping champagne. The journalist saw a woman with a bird cage around her head, another with a stag mask adorned with glittering tears. Men sported top hat, with giant lobsters perched on them, or faces painted with double features, truly as if Magritte or Dali had come to life before the journalist's eyes. In fact, as the journalist navigated through the crowd with a tray in hand, the journalist nearly stumbled, because the journalist realized the journalist had just brushed past Audrey Hepburn, radiant in a simple black dress and a whimsical bird mask. Across the room, the unmistakable mustache of Salvador Dali curled above a sly grin. The world's elite were here, from movie stars to artists to moguls, all drawn by the legendary extravagance of the Rothschild family, their hosts. Our instructions as staff were clear: remain unobtrusive, serve the guests, and absolutely no photography or asking for autographs. As the evening progressed, the journalist weaved through grand salons and ballrooms carrying drinks. The Baroness Marie-Helene de Rothschild herself, our hostess, floated through the crowds in a stunning gown, her face concealed behind a bejeweled deer mask, with tears made of real diamonds. She greeted each arrival with continental double-cheek kisses. The atmosphere was intoxicating, a blend of elegance and absurdity. Underneath the joviality, however, the journalist detected an undercurrent of something else, something secretive. Whispers in the corners, knowing glances passing between certain guests. The journalist remembered rumors that these high society gatherings sometimes doubled as meetings for secret clubs or agendas, away from prying eyes. At one point, as midnight neared, the journalist slipped away from the journalist's duties and followed a trio of revelers who seemed to be sneaking upstairs. Two men in gilt bird masks flanked a giggling young woman in a flowing ethereal gown. She was tipsy, her laughter echoing down the marble corridor. The journalist recognized her, a rising European starlet barely in her 20s who had been twirling on the dance floor earlier. Something about the way the men ushered her along, one on each arm, set off alarm bells in the journalist's mind. They disappeared through a side door on the second floor. After glancing around to ensure no one noticed me, the journalist crept up and listened at the heavy oak door. Muffled voices, then a feminine squeal that was quickly hushed. The journalist's heart pounded. Ever so gently, the journalist turned the brass knob and opened the door a crack. It was a dimly lit study. The young actress lay sprawled on a velvet fainting couch, her surreal butterfly mask askew. She was conscious but dazed, blinking slowly. The two masked men hovered over her. One held a small vial. The other was removing his mask, revealing an older man with sharp features. The journalist recognized him instantly, an influential European dignitary, though the journalist had only ever seen him in newspapers. He was saying something in a low, insistent voice. "Just relax, my dear. This is all part of the experience." She mumbled a weak protest, and the second man gently shushed her while producing a syringe. The journalist's blood ran cold as the journalist realized they were about to drug her. At that moment, the journalists lost their caution. The journalist pushed the door open and stepped inside. "Is everything all right here?" the journalist asked as firmly as the journalist could muster. All heads snapped toward me. The second man, still masked, pocketed the syringe immediately. The dignitary's face contorted with anger. "Get out! This room is off limits to staff," he snarled. The young woman on the couch turned her head toward me, eyes glassy. "Help," she whispered, barely audible. One of her arms dangled off the couch, and the journalist could see now her champagne glass had fallen to the carpet, its contents spilled. She had been far more than tipsy. She'd been slipped something. I took a step forward, unsure what the journalist was thinking of doing. There were two of them and only one of me, and the journalist was no fire. But the journalist's movement emboldened her. She tried to sit up, and the dignitary's veneer of charm dropped entirely. He lunged toward me, his features twisting in rage. "Leave now," he hissed, "if you know what's good for you." Behind him, the other man tightened his grip on the now unconscious actress. The sight of her limply falling back against the couch made the journalist's stomach turn. It was clear that if the journalist stayed, the journalist's own safety would be in peril. Every instinct screamed at the journalist to intervene, but self-preservation won out in that split second. The journalist backed out, raising the journalist's hands. "I'm sorry, the journalist got lost," the journalist stammered, loudly enough to be heard by anyone in the hall. "I'll go back downstairs." The dignitary paused, his eyes boring into mine. For a moment, the journalist thought he might call for security or worse. Instead, he moved to the door and shut it firmly in the journalist's face. The lock clicked. Shaking, the journalist retreated down the hallway. The journalist's mind raced. Should the journalist find someone, alert a staff manager? But who would believe me, a lowly waiter who wasn't even supposed to be there, accusing a powerful VIP of, what exactly? Of planning to assault a guest. This was the Rothschilds' party. Would they even dare make a scandal here? Or were they in on it? The journalist felt nauseated by the possibilities. Back in the main hall, the revelry continued as if nothing were amiss. A string ensemble played a waltz, while costumed guests danced under crystal chandeliers. The journalist spotted the Baroness, happily chatting with an ambassador near a table piled with exotic desserts, a life-size nude woman made of sugar among them, in keeping with the night's surreal theme. The contrast between the refined beauty of the ball and the vile scene they witnessed upstairs was almost too much to reconcile. The journalist had to get out. The journalist returned to the kitchen and hastily shed their waiter's jacket. Without waiting for their shift to formally end, the journalist slipped out through a side servant's exit into the cold night. Snow flurries had started to drift down. The journalist's breath clouded in the air as the journalist rounded the building toward the front, the journalist's heart still hammering. The journalist had to know. Were they going to get away with it? The rational part of the journalist knew the journalist couldn't barge back in as a righteous hero. They likely would be silenced or disappeared. But the journalist also couldn't just drive off without ensuring that young woman was safe. As the journalist debated, a black limousine rolled up the drive toward the house, its headlights cutting through the light snow. The journalist hid behind a hedge and watched as it stopped by the main door. To the journalist's surprise, the two men from the study emerged carrying the unconscious starlet between them. She was cloaked in an evening cape, head lolled onto her chest, looking for all the world as if passed out from too much drink. The dignitary barked some orders to a footman, and together they maneuvered her into the limo's back seat. Within a minute, the car sped off into the night, red tail lights fading beyond the gates. The journalist stood there in the snow, stunned and horrified. Should the journalist have run after the car? What then? throw themselves in front of it. It was too late, and any attempt to raise alarm at the mansion now would be futile. The perpetrators were literally driving away. The journalist had no proof of what the journalist saw. No names that anyone would dare prosecute without evidence. The journalist felt an immense weight of guilt settle on me. In a daze, the journalist walked to where their catering van was parked and climbed in the back, sinking onto an empty crate. The journalist's colleagues were still inside cleaning up, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. The journalist sat there shaking until the driver found the journalist later and asked why the journalist looked so pale. The journalist mumbled something about feeling ill. The next day, the journalist scoured the newspapers and society pages, expecting at least a hint of scandal. But there was nothing. No reports of a missing actress or any incident at the ball. It was as if it never happened. A glossy magazine ran a glowing piece about the surrealist ball, marveling at the opulence, the celebrity guest list, the fantastical decorations. It praised the Rothschilds for hosting the party of the century. Indeed, that night was to be the last great ball they ever held at Ferrier. Officially, it was said they could never top that extravaganza, so why try? But the journalist has their own dark suspicions as to why such parties ceased. Years later, the journalist saw an interview with that very actress. She had faded from the spotlight and was living a quiet life in the countryside. When the interviewer touched on her early career and that period, a shadow crossed her face. She mentioned she had stepped away from film suddenly in the early 70s due to health issues. The journalist wondered if those health issues began the night of the Masquerade. Did she even remember what happened? Was she warned to forget? I'll never know. She certainly didn't mention the ball, and the journalist doubted anyone ever dared ask. I often lie awake haunted by the image of that locked door and their own cowardice. The halls of that chateau saw unspeakable acts behind all the glitter and glamour. I'm sure of it. Elite gatherings like that ball aren't just harmless fun. They can hide predatory darkness under the mask of revelry. The journalist learned that the shiny world of high society has shadows as black as any alley, and that monsters wear suits and silk just as easily as they do rags. The next time you see photos of a lavish party in some gilded hall, remember, you never really know what's happening once the guests wander beyond the candlelight and into the dark, forbidden rooms. Story 3: Shadows at the Summit. A reporter determined to uncover the truth infiltrates a luxury hotel hosting a secretive meeting of world elites. Behind closed doors, he overhears a conversation that suggests global events are being orchestrated in the shadows, and quickly learns some secrets are guarded by more than just locked doors. The reporter arrived in the English countryside under the guise of a hotel waiter. The Grove, a hotel in Hertfordshire, looked tranquil with its manicured lawns, but beyond the gates, tension hung in the air. It was June 2013, and one of the world's most secretive conferences was underway, the Bilderberg meeting. Officially, it was just an informal gathering of political and business leaders. Unofficially, it was the stuff of conspiracy legend, a place where some claimed the global agenda for the year was set in stone away from public scrutiny. Weeks before, the reporter pitched the idea to editor, let the reporter investigate Bilderberg. He laughed it off, warning the reporter not to tumble down that rabbit hole. So the reporter came on their own time. Through a friend of a friend, the reporter got hired as temporary staff at the hotel just for this event. The organizers had taken over the entire resort, employing strict security. It was a perfect cover, with a uniform and name badge. The reporter could move relatively unnoticed, at least more freely than the protesters and paparazzi, who were kept a mile away outside the perimeter. On the first day of the conference, the reporter served coffee and breakfast pastries to some of the most powerful people on the planet. In the grand dining room turned into a private meeting space, the reporter recognized familiar faces. Henry Kissinger, frail but still commanding respect. David Petraeus, the former CIA director. Christine Lagarde, head of the IMF, tech CEOs, European royalty, high-ranking ministers, all casually chatting under crystal chandeliers. There were about 130 attendees that year, an elite roster that made the reporter's head spin. The official line was that they were here for off-the-record discussions on world affairs. No agenda or press releases. What happens at Bilderberg stays at Bilderberg, as one journalist wryly noted. The staff had been thoroughly briefed. Do their jobs, do not engage the guests in conversation, and absolutely no recording devices. The reporter's heart was pounding nearly every minute the reporter was on duty, afraid someone would see through the reporter. But as the hours passed, the reporter began to blend in. To them, the reporter was just part of the scenery, a nameless server refilling water glasses. On the second evening, the reporter spotted an opportunity. The delegates were gathering in a conference hall for a group dinner followed by a lecture. The reporter noticed that one of the smaller meeting rooms down the hall, usually locked, had been left slightly ajar by cleaning staff. A quick glance around, no one in sight. The reporter slipped inside that dark room and quietly shut the door. The reporter's plan was half-baked. The reporter intended to wait until the hallways were empty during the lecture, then maybe scout for documents or overhear conversations. The reporter sat in the dark, listening through the thin wall to the murmur of voices outside. From the reporter's pocket, the reporter retrieved a tiny digital recorder, strictly against the rules, but the reporter wasn't leaving without evidence. After what felt like an eternity, the clinking of dinnerware and polite laughter subsided as everyone moved to the lecture hall. The corridor was finally quiet. The reporter cracked open the door and peered out. Guards in suits were stationed at the far ends of the corridor, but they couldn't see the reporter from their positions. The reporter crept into the hall and moved toward a service stairwell. The reporter knew connected near a smaller breakout room. Earlier, the reporter had overheard that a few key players were skipping the lecture for a private side discussion. The reporter's gut told himself that's where the real decisions would happen. The door to that breakout room was heavy, and as expected, locked. But luck was on the reporter's side. Someone had carelessly left a keycard in an electric panel nearby, perhaps a staff master key. With trembling fingers, the reporter swiped it and the door clicked open. The reporter slipped into an empty adjacent viewing room that was separated from the main room by a retractable partition wall. The partition was closed, but it didn't reach the ceiling, leaving a gap. The reporter could hear voices clearly through it. There were maybe 5 or 6 people next door. A woman with a crisp British accent was speaking. The vote is next fall. Their media assets must amplify the narrative by Q3 to ensure the public accepts the treaty. A man responded in an American drawl. If that fails, they have contingency plans. Civil unrest could be incited. Fear always works. The reporter's breath hitched. The reporter recognized that American voice from news interviews, a tech billionaire with deep government ties. Another voice, French-sounding, cut in. We all saw how effective a little chaos can be in bending a nation's will. Just remember the market adjustments. We'll short at the right time and reap the rewards amid the panic. The reporter's mind raced as the reporter realized the significance of what the reporter was hearing. They were talking about engineering events, manipulating public opinion, even provoking unrest to achieve some policy outcome and profit from it. It was the nightmare scenario every conspiracy theorist raves about, except here it was in cold matter-of-fact terms, by people with the power to do it. The reporter strained to catch every word. Another person spoke, a deep voice. Our friend in Beijing has agreed to the parameters. Once the crisis is triggered, the response will be coordinated across central banks. By the time anyone catches on, the consolidation will be irreversible. The reporter didn't fully understand that part, but terms like crisis and consolidation sent a shiver through me. Suddenly, the voices hushed. "Did you hear something?" one person said. The reporter froze. In the reporter's shock at what the reporter was hearing, the reporter hadn't noticed their shoulder pressing against the partition wall, causing it to creak softly. The reporter's blood turned to ice. A chair scraped on the other side as someone stood. The reporter slipped back toward the door they entered from, heart thundering in their ears. Too late. The door swung open and a beam of a flashlight cut across the dark room. A man in a security earpiece blocked the reporter's exit. "Hello there," he said calmly, as if greeting a guest. The reporter bolted toward the other direction, but two more guards were already coming in from the partition door that had been opened from the conference side. The reporter was caught. They seized the reporter by the arms. The reporter expected to be beaten or at least yelled at, but instead one guard politely said, "This area is off limits, sir. We'll have to escort you out." In seconds, the reporter was marched out a back corridor. The reporter's mind was still reeling from what they heard, but now panic at the reporter's discovery consumed me. Who exactly had the reporter just listened to? How much trouble was the reporter in? The guards led the reporter to a service elevator. In the reflection of its metallic walls, the reporter saw themselves, wide-eyed, sweating in their waiter uniform. One guard searched the reporter and found a digital recorder. He held it up with a thin smile. "We'll take that." "I'm a journalist," the reporter blurted out finally, as if it weren't obvious by their actions. "This is illegal detention." The reporter's voice was a shaky whisper. The first guard responded quietly, "No, this is private property. You trespassed. We're simply removing you." The elevator opened to the basement parking garage. They walked the reporter out toward the exit away from the main security post. Before they let the reporter go, the guard with the reporter's recorder stepped close and spoke in a low voice that only the reporter could hear. "You've stuck your nose where it doesn't belong. For your own sake, forget what you think you heard. You have a family, don't you?" The reporter's stomach dropped. The reporter hadn't mentioned anything about their personal life. How could he know? The reporter opened their mouth, but no words came. He continued slipping the reporter's cell phone, minus the battery, back into their pocket. Accidents happen to curious people. Drive safe. With that chilling farewell, they shoved the reporter gently out into the deserted back lot. The reporter stumbled, caught their footing, and turned. The guards were already walking back inside, the door shutting behind them with a thud. The reporter stood there stunned. In the distant main driveway, the reporter could see the glow of headlights. One by one, black sedans and limousines were leaving, probably ferrying attendees back to their villas after the evening session. The reporter spotted one car with diplomatic plates and recognized the profile of a famous banking CEO in the back seat. These were the people the reporter had nearly exposed, and they had let the reporter walk away this time, The reporter didn't wait around. The reporter hurried to the staff dorm where they were staying, grabbed their duffel bag, and left the hotel grounds before anyone could change their mind. The reporter drove through the night back to London, hands shaking on the wheel. Every pair of headlights behind the reporter made their heart leap, thinking the reporter was being followed. In the days after, the reporter scoured news outlets for any sign of what was discussed. Of course, nothing concrete emerged, just bland statements about topics like emerging markets and cybersecurity. But 3 months later, a wave of eerily timed riots broke out in several cities on the same weekend, coupled with a sudden stock market plunge. The very unrest and market adjustments they heard them planning came to pass, cloaked as coincidence. Perhaps the public will never know that those events were not wholly organic, but the reporter knows. The reporter was there in the shadows of that summit, and the reporter heard the puppet masters scheming. The reporter didn't publish a word of what the reporter experienced. Who would believe it without hard evidence? Their recorder was gone, and those powerful figures had covered their tracks well. Sometimes, the reporter is racked with guilt for staying silent. Other times, the reporter is convinced keeping their head down was the only reason the reporter is still alive to tell this story at all. Now, whenever the reporter hears of a major event that no one saw coming, the reporter recalls that muffled conversation through the wall. The reporter thinks of the ease with which they spoke about steering the fate of millions. And the reporter remembers the final warning from that smiling guard, reminding the reporter that some truths are protected by men who operate above any law. The reporter learned that the world's course may be charted in secret meetings long before they experience it, and that shining light on those secrets can be deadly. Story 4. Kill switch. Late one night, a government whistleblower races down a highway in his computer-packed luxury sedan, fleeing pursuers he can't see. When his car suddenly takes on a mind of its own, he realizes the shadowy figures he's running from have found a new way to silence him. The digital speedometer climbed past 90 miles per hour, yet the whistleblower's foot wasn't even on the accelerator. The whistleblower's heart pounded as the whistleblower gripped the steering wheel of the whistleblower's Mercedes, trying in vain to slow down. The car was driving itself, headlights and taillights streaked by in a blur as the whistleblower careened down the highway in the dead of night. The whistleblower yanked the emergency brake. Nothing. The whistleblower slammed the gear shift into neutral. No response, as if it were locked in drive. Dashboard lights flashed erratically. In that panicked moment, the words of a security expert they once read came back to haunt the whistleblower. You could remotely wreck someone by hacking into their car's controls. It was happening to the whistleblower. The whistleblower was certain of it, and the whistleblower knew exactly why. Just an hour earlier, the whistleblower had been frantically copying classified files onto a flash drive at the federal office where the whistleblower worked. The corridors were empty at that late hour. They discovered something heinous, a program that allowed a rogue intelligence unit to surveil and neutralize American citizens deemed threats without any due process. The whistleblower wasn't some wide-eyed idealist. The whistleblower was a senior IT administrator, and the whistleblower knew the weight of what they found. The whistleblower had decided to leak the evidence to the press by morning, but the whistleblower must not have covered their tracks well enough, because as the whistleblower left the building, the whistleblower spotted a black SUV idling by the curb. When the whistleblower stepped outside, it lurched forward. The tinted window rolled down just a few inches, and the whistleblower saw the glint of an earpiece on the driver. The whistleblower didn't wait to find out more. They bolted for their car in the lot and took off. That's when the cat and mouse game began. The whistleblower headed for the interstate, hoping to lose any tails in traffic. For a while, it seemed to work. The whistleblower couldn't spot the SUV anymore. The whistleblower was alone, adrenaline pumping, mind racing over what to do next. That's when the whistleblower's car's infotainment screen flickered, went black, then rebooted with the radio blasting static. The sudden sound made the whistleblower jump. Then the engine revved on its own. Now the RPM needle redlined as the whistleblower sped uncontrollably. The memory of an infamous incident surfaced, a journalist who died in a fiery crash a few years back. Authorities called it an accident, but the whistleblower recalled how a former security czar had said the crash was consistent with a car cyber attack. At the time, the whistleblower thought it sounded far-fetched. Not anymore. The whistleblower was living it. Someone, likely the very people the whistleblower was trying to expose, had activated a literal kill switch on the whistleblower. The wheel jerked in their hands, pulling hard to the left as the whistleblower approached a curve. The whistleblower's seatbelt ratcheted tighter, pinning the whistleblower to the seat as the car swerved into the oncoming lane. Horns blared. The whistleblower narrowly missed a pickup truck, scraping past it with a scream of metal on metal. The whistleblower fought the wheel, trying to guide the car back, but it was like wrestling a ghost. The electronics were overriding the whistleblower's every move. The whistleblower stomped the brakes with all their strength. The pedal went to the floor without effect. There was no mechanical link. Everything was drive-by-wire, and the whistleblower's adversary had taken control of those wires. On a modern car like mine, nearly every critical function was controlled by computers. The whistleblower might as well have been a passenger. The whistleblower's mind flashed to what exactly awaited the whistleblower if the whistleblower didn't somehow break free of this technological noose. The road ahead descended into a straightaway, flanked by towering pines. If they wanted to kill the whistleblower, they'd choose a spot like this with no witnesses. Would they slam the whistleblower into a tree at 100 miles an hour? Trigger the airbag at full speed? The possibilities were endless and all deadly. Through the windshield, the whistleblower noticed the headlights behind the whistleblower growing distant. Whoever was following had backed off. Of course they had. They didn't need to stay close now. The whistleblower imagined them hanging back, watching the whistleblower's taillights zigzag wildly, waiting for the inevitable fiery end. The whistleblower's breath came in ragged gasps. The whistleblower wasn't ready to die, not without a fight. The whistleblower fumbled at their phone on the passenger seat, intending to record a voice message or anything to leave evidence, but the screen was dark. They must have remotely disabled it too, or perhaps the wild electromagnetic havoc in the car had fried it. With a snarl of frustration, the whistleblower hurled the phone aside. In sheer desperation, the whistleblower tried something drastic. The whistleblower unbuckled their seatbelt and scrambled into the back seat, while the car barreled forward under its own malicious intent. If the whistleblower could reach the wiring under the rear floor of the trunk, maybe the whistleblower could physically sever power to the motors. The car veered again, nearly throwing the whistleblower against the door. The whistleblower grabbed a headrest to steady themselves. Suddenly, a new sound joined the cacophony of the racing engine and wind whipping past the windows. A synthesized voice from the car's Bluetooth system. "Please return to your seat," it said in a flat tone. The whistleblower froze. That wasn't a standard car alert. Someone was speaking through the whistleblower's car, mocking them. "You should have destroyed the data," the voice crackled through the speakers, eerily calm. A surge of terror and anger coursed through the whistleblower. They were watching the whistleblower inside the car, perhaps via one of the onboard cameras or sensors. The whistleblower shouted hoarsely, "Go to hell," and lunged back into the driver's seat, determined to somehow regain control or at least derail their plan. Up ahead, the whistleblower saw the road bending into an even sharper curve around the edge of a hill. Beyond the guardrail, nothing but darkness and the hint of a ravine. The steering began to turn on its own toward the curve, but far too late and far too fast. They meant to send the whistleblower flying off the cliffside. Time slowed in those final seconds. The whistleblower braced their arms against the wheel, straining with all their might to counter the turn. The tires hit the shoulder, gravel spraying. For a fleeting moment, the right side wheels lifted and the whistleblower thought the car would flip, but then they slammed back down. The guardrail was rushing toward the whistleblower on the left. In a last act of defiance, the whistleblower yanked the wheel in the opposite direction with a scream of effort. Metal met metal. The car sideswiped the guardrail with an ear-splitting shriek. Sparks erupted as the rail tore into the bodywork, and the vehicle decelerated violently, bouncing off the rail and skidding. The whistleblower was flung forward, their chest hit the steering column, and their vision blurred with pain. The momentum hurled the car across the road. The whistleblower glimpsed trees ahead and knew impact was imminent. For a split second, there was an uncanny silence inside the cabin. In that silence, the whistleblower let out something between a sob and a roar, a mix of terror, rage, and sorrow. Then came the final crash, a brutal, deafening crunch as the front of the Mercedes plowed into the trunk of a massive pine. Everything went black. The whistleblower regained consciousness to agony and the acrid smell of smoke. The whistleblower's eyes cracked open to see the world sideways. The whistleblower realized the car had come to rest on its side. Somehow, the impact hadn't killed the whistleblower outright. Pain screamed from what felt like every bone. The whistleblower tasted blood. Through the shattered windshield, the whistleblower saw fire licking up from the crumpled hood. The engine was burning. Number. Not like this. Summoning the last reserves of strength, the whistleblower clawed at the seatbelt. It had locked again, digging into their injured ribs. After several panicked tugs, it was released. The whistleblower crawled through the broken window, glass slicing at the whistleblower's palms, and tumbled out onto the forest floor. The night air was cold against their face. The whistleblower dragged himself away on the whistleblower's elbows, one useless leg trailing behind. 10 feet, 20, until the whistleblower collapsed against a stump behind the whistleblower. The car was now an inferno, flames illuminating the trees. If they remained trapped a minute longer, they would have been incinerated. The whistleblower's vision swam, but as the whistleblower fought to stay conscious, the whistleblower saw them, 2 figures at the top of the road, silhouetted by headlights. The black SUV they had stopped to make sure their work was done. One started walking down toward the wreck, a gun in hand glinting. The whistleblower wanted to run, but the whistleblower couldn't even stand. Instead, the whistleblower closed their eyes and slumped, feigning death. It wasn't much of a stretch. The whistleblower could barely breathe, and each breath rattled. Through cracked eyelids, the whistleblower watched the man approach. He surveyed the wreck for a moment, then turned his flashlight on the whistleblower. The beam lingered on their face. The whistleblower fought the instinct to flinch or squint. He came closer, so close the whistleblower could see the resolve in his cold gaze. The whistleblower tensed, expecting a bullet to finish the job. Instead, he knelt and felt for a pulse on their neck. The whistleblower held their breath. After a few seconds, apparently finding none, he stood up. "It's done," he called to his partner. "Nothing left but a charred corpse when this thing blows." He retreated up the slope swiftly. The SUV's doors slammed and the vehicle reversed out of sight. leaving the whistleblower to die in the flames. A hysterical laugh bubbled up inside the whistleblower, but the whistleblower didn't let it out. They were wrong. The whistleblower wasn't dead, at least not yet. But if the whistleblower wanted to stay alive, the whistleblower had to move now. With their remaining strength and will, the whistleblower inched farther from the burning wreckage, deeper into the shadows of the trees. A minute later, the Mercedes gas tank erupted with a whoomp, casting a brief orange fireball into the sky. The roar faded into the crackle of fire and the rasp of the whistleblower's breathing. Eventually, the whistleblower heard distant sirens. Perhaps a passing driver saw the flames and called 911. The whistleblower would live to see dawn, the whistleblower thought. But they have to be smart if the whistleblower wanted to survive beyond that. They'd surely check the hospital morgues for the whistleblower's body. The whistleblower needed to disappear. Take the evidence the whistleblower still had tucked in their shoe, and somehow expose the truth without exposing themselves. As the whistleblower lay in the darkness waiting for help, tears of pain and frustration slid down their face. The deep state operatives they tried to outwit had almost murdered the whistleblower with the push of a button. No car bomb, no gunshot, just code and physics twisted for assassination. In the modern world, death can come as a sudden software update, an invisible hand on your steering wheel. The whistleblower survived their kill switch tonight, but the whistleblower knows the whistleblower won't get another chance. Next time, if there is one, the whistleblower doubts they'll see it coming at all. Story 5. Beneath the temple. Haunted by guilt, a former limo chauffeur for a notorious billionaire travels to his now abandoned private island. He sneaks into the property's mysterious temple, only to find that some secrets were left behind, and that true evil still lingers in the darkness below. From the moment the chauffeur's boat touched the shores of Little St. James, the chauffeur felt like the chauffeur was trespassing on the land of a ghost. The small Caribbean island, once bustling with wealthy guests and secretive parties, now lay eerily silent. The chauffeur killed the engine and let the dinghy glide into a hidden cove overgrown with palms. The main dock on the other side was likely under watch, even now. The chauffeur was taking no chances. Clutching a flashlight and the chauffeur's old set of keys, the chauffeur crept up a rocky path. They wore dark clothes and even darker memories to this place. For nearly 10 years, the chauffeur had been one of Jeffrey Epstein's personal drivers. The chauffeur ferried the rich and famous to his mansions, his jet, and yes, even to his private island. Senators, royalty, tech CEOs, they drove them all to meet the chauffeur's enigmatic boss. Back then, the chauffeur told himself it was just a job. Keep your eyes on the road and your mouth shut, and you get a fat paycheck. But denial is a fragile thing. The hints were there all along. The two young women whisked away behind closed doors. The offhand chilling jokes Epstein made in the back seat when he thought the chauffeur wasn't listening. By the time the chauffeur fully understood the horrors they were complicit in enabling, it was too late. Epstein was arrested, charged with sex trafficking dozens of minors, and the world finally saw him for the monster he was. Then he died in jail under murky circumstances, and his victims were left with more questions than answers. The chauffeur left that life behind, but guilt never left the chauffeur. Every night they see faces of girls they drove, wondering which ones were hurt, which ones might even be dead. When Epstein's death was reported a suicide, though many suspect otherwise, the chauffeur felt a sickening mix of relief and despair. He escaped earthly justice, but perhaps there was still a way to bring truth to light. Some piece of the puzzle that remained on this island which law enforcement combed over but the chauffeur suspected hadn't fully understood. Rumors swirled about a bizarre blue and white building on the island, a supposed temple with a golden dome that could be seen from the sea. Conspiracy forums claimed it concealed underground rooms or tunnels where unspeakable things happened. The chauffeur knew the building well. Epstein once jokingly called it his party chapel. The chauffeur had no idea what was inside, but the chauffeur intended to find out. Maybe it would give the chauffeur and the world some closure. The moon was just a sliver, casting faint light as the chauffeur navigated past the shadowy outline of Epstein's main villa. The chauffeur avoided the motion lights and silent cameras. Whether they still fed to anyone's monitor, the chauffeur didn't know, but the chauffeur assumed they did. The island's silence was heavy. No laughter, no distant thump of music, only the chirp of tree frogs and the crash of distant waves. With every step, the chauffeur imagined the chauffeur might hear the patter of feet of the many girls who once ran about these grounds, now long gone. There it was, the so-called temple, perched on a rise of land beyond a tangle of bushes. Even in the dark, its striped blue and white walls were visible, illuminated faintly by the stars and the glow of the villa's landscape lights. The gold dome that once topped it was gone, blown off in a hurricane and never replaced, leaving a flat roof edged by stonework. The chauffeur approached carefully, circling the structure. The front had a large painted door with a stylized golden arch. The chauffeur remembered that door well. It had heavy magnetic locks. Epstein used to brag it was hurricane-proof. What he didn't mention was how its locks engaged, on the outside, as if designed to keep someone in. The chauffeur's keys were useless here, and indeed the door was secured tight. The chauffeur went around to the rear, where the chauffeur knew a small service hatch might be. The jungle encroached on this side. The chauffeur had to duck under vines and step over fallen fronds. Then behind some bushes, the chauffeur found it, a metal bulkhead door flush with the ground, almost like a storm cellar entrance left conspicuously ajar. The chauffeur's heart kicked into overdrive. Someone had been here recently, perhaps even now. The chauffeur hadn't considered that others might be sneaking onto the island too. Could be curiosity seekers or conspirators retrieving incriminating evidence. The chauffeur debated turning back, but the pull of the chauffeur's conscience drove the chauffeur onward. The chauffeur lifted the hatch the rest of the way and descended a short ladder into musty darkness. The chauffeur clicked on the chauffeur's flashlight, its beam cutting through dust motes. The chauffeur found himself in a narrow tunnel with concrete walls. The air was thick and still, carrying a faint odor of dampness and decay. Following the passage, the chauffeur realized it sloped upward slightly, likely leading into the temple's interior. Sure enough, after a dozen yards, the chauffeur came upon the base of a spiral staircase leading up. Exactly as rumored, a staircase descended beneath the temple, and the chauffeur was now at the bottom of it, looking up at a hatch above. The chauffeur ascended slowly, every creak of the old iron steps making the chauffeur wince. At the top, another heavy door was propped open. The chauffeur recognized the interior of the temple from photos, a single square room with tall windows now boarded, and walls painted with faux stone murals. The place was empty except for some scattered debris, fallen plaster, an overturned wooden chair, a few plastic bins. Nothing especially enlightening. If there were secrets here, they lay below, in the tunnels the chauffeur had just entered. Steeling themselves, the chauffeur turned away from the hatch and headed deeper underground. The corridor branched, and the chauffeur chose the larger path, The architecture felt too robust to have been a mere wine cellar or storage, as some claimed. The chauffeur passed small chambers on either side, windowless rooms with thick doors. In one, the chauffeur found something that made the chauffeur's blood run cold. A chain bolted into the wall, ending in a metal shackle. It was the kind used to restrain a person's ankle or wrist. The floor bore scratches and a dark stain the chauffeur couldn't identify in the beam of the chauffeur's flashlight. In another cell-like room, the chauffeur saw a dirty twin-size mattress, disheveled and stained, and faint childlike drawings on the wall in pencil. Flowers, a sun, a stick-figure girl. The chauffeur's vision blurred with rage and grief as the chauffeur realized the chauffeur might be standing in the very place where young victims were kept captive. The flashlight flickered, its batteries struggling, or maybe it sensed the chauffeur's own trembling. The chauffeur smacked it and the light steadied. The chauffeur pressed on, finding what looked like a central chamber at the end of the hall. This room was larger, octagonal in shape, with an ominous stone table in the middle. An altar. It indeed looked like one. On it sat the remnants of melted candles, some broken glassware, and the chauffeur leaned closer. Restraints. Leather straps bolted to the sides of the table with dark imprints where something or someone had lain many times. The chauffeur's stomach churned. The chauffeur felt lightheaded and had to steady themselves against a pillar. In the chauffeur's mind, they heard echoes, imagined or perhaps real, of screams and cries reverberating in these chambers. The chauffeur could almost see, in the edge of the chauffeur's vision, fleeting shapes. A terrified girl being dragged down the hall. Epstein's looming figure, other indistinct shapes in robes or masks observing from the corners. A wave of nausea hit the chauffeur. How many lives were destroyed in this subterranean nightmare? How many awful nights had the chauffeur unwittingly enabled by delivering girls into his sphere? The chauffeur noticed a small desk pushed against the wall, likely used by whoever oversaw this hidden dungeon. Rummaging through the drawers, the chauffeur found a few telling items. A ledger with dates and code initials, which made their skin crawl as the chauffeur guessed their meaning. A Polaroid photograph. The chauffeur dared not shine the chauffeur's light on it for long. The glimpse was enough to see it depicted a girl on the altar table, surrounded by figures in strange costumes, and a handheld camcorder. The camera had no tape in it, but an old tape was discarded in the drawer. The chauffeur pocketed the tape and the ledger. Evidence. Somehow, the chauffeur would get these to the authorities or the media, anonymous if the chauffeur had to. They were too monstrous to keep secret. The man they attacked shoved the chauffeur off, cursing in a language the chauffeur didn't recognize. The chauffeur slumped against the stone table, blood seeping warm down the chauffeur's arm. The two stood over the chauffeur. In the harsh light, the chauffeur could now see their faces. The chauffeur didn't recognize them personally, but they had the hardened look of mercenaries. The one they bitten had a vicious snarl. He retrieved his pistol from the ground and pointed it at the chauffeur's forehead, his hand shaking with rage. "Who are you?" he growled. The chauffeur spat out a tooth and some blood, managing a defiant glare. "No one," the chauffeur said hoarsely. "Just a driver." He looked taken aback for a moment, then gave a humorless chuckle. So, the little chauffeur grew a conscience. He pressed the gun harder to his temple. "Too bad for you." The other man intervened, speaking in a measured tone. "Shoot and we'll have a mess to deal with." They take him back and find out who he's told. The chauffeur mustered a bitter laugh. "You think the chauffeur told someone? You think they come alone if the chauffeur did? Idiots. It was a bluff, but the chauffeur delivered it with as much smugness as the chauffeur could to sow doubt. Truth is, no one in the world knew the chauffeur was here. They exchanged glances. The tall man cursed. "Check if he got anything." The one with the bitten hand ripped the chauffeur's pockets inside out. The camera tape and ledger were not on the chauffeur. Thank God. He found nothing but the keys and flashlight. He looked around, eyes narrowing at the desk. He took something. "Where is it?" The chauffeur said nothing, staring at the floor. The taste of copper filled their mouth. The tall man sighed. "Enough. We'll search the whole damn place later. For now, tie him up." The chauffeur was roughly dragged to one of the small cells. I think the very one with the chain on the wall. How darkly fitting. They clamped that shackle around the chauffeur's ankle. It was tight and brutally cold. The man they bitten leaned in close, his breath hot on the chauffeur's face. "We were never here," he whispered, "and neither were you." He shoved a rag into the chauffeur's mouth to gag the chauffeur. "We'll be back soon. Don't go anywhere," he added with a sneer. With that, they departed, their flashlights bobbing away and leaving the chauffeur in utter blackness. The chauffeur heard the distant metallic clang of the hatch door and the grind of its sealing, then silence. The chauffeur tugged at the chain in fury, but it held fast, its bolt deep in the concrete. Pain radiated from the chauffeur's shoulder. Warm blood trickled down their chest. The chauffeur was now one of the lost in Epstein's dungeon, a bitter irony not lost on the chauffeur despite the chauffeur's terror. Would they come back and kill the chauffeur? Likely. Perhaps stage the chauffeur's death as an accident, or entomb the chauffeur here forever. It might not matter. The chauffeur could bleed out or succumb to infection if left too long. In the darkness, despair closed in, and with it, the voices of the past. The chauffeur heard sobbing echoes, imagined cries of those girls. The chauffeur felt that if the chauffeur listened hard, the chauffeur might even hear the chauffeur's own name in their chorus, condemning the chauffeur for every ride, every opened limo door that delivered them to hell. No one will ever believe what happened here, the chauffeur thought bitterly. Even with that tape and ledger, they'll spin some story if it ever surfaces. And the chauffeur will vanish without a trace, just another accomplice wiped off the board. The chauffeur don't know how long the chauffeur has been here now. Writing this with a nub of pencil, the chauffeur found, and a scrap of that ledger's torn back page, using the faintest light from a vent above. It might be futile, but the chauffeur wants someone, anyone, to know. The evil that took place on this island did not die with its owner. It lives on in the loyal, smiling men who still serve the interests of the powerful, in the silence of those too scared to speak, in people like the chauffeur who waited far too long to do the right thing. They're coming back. The chauffeur hears footsteps overhead. If by some miracle the chauffeur escapes this, the chauffeur will carry these nightmares to the chauffeur's grave regardless. But if the chauffeur doesn't, if the chauffeur disappears into the dark under this temple, let this account stand as the chauffeur's final confession. The chauffeur was a witness. The chauffeur is sorry, and the chauffeur prays that one day the light reaches even the deepest tunnel, and all the secrets buried here will finally be brought to justice. And that concludes our journey through these 5 chilling limousine conspiracies. From the clandestine riots in Redwood Groves to the cryptic temple on a private island, each story peels back another layer of secrecy beneath the polished veneer of high society. But I want to hear from you. Which of these tales kept you up at night the most? Was it the midnight phantom in the forest, the silent passenger who never left, Or perhaps the temple hiding something unspeakable? Drop a comment below with your pick for the most compelling or most disturbing story. Share your theories too. Do you believe any of these have a grain of truth? If you enjoy delving into the dark edges of luxury and intrigue, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I'm constantly unearthing rare stories that blend opulence with eerie twists. So stay tuned if you crave more unsettling secrets and hidden corners of wealth. Thank you all for watching. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most luxurious ride can conceal the darkest destination. Stay curious, stay safe, and until next time,